So this is a working group that's been started in France in 2009 that aimed to develop the paper and pencil battery with solid norms to evaluate executive functions in children. And that we were part of the group that validated the battery while the norms were collected in childhood traumatic brain injury. So childhood traumatic brain injury is the leading cause of death and acquired disability, and it is really a serious public health issue, as we've seen earlier. And it leads to a number of impairments in many domains, for example, sensory motor functioning, but also cognitive, and among cognitive, lots of memory, attention, and executive function deficits, behavioral deficits, and then emotional and social functioning impairments. Executive functions are complex, and they're a collection of related but also distinct abilities that allow one to engage efficiently and effectively in intentional, so that means you need to have initiative and not be, for example, apathic, complex, purposeful, and goal-directed, so you need to have an aim, problem-solving actions, and you need conscious and effortful processing, so it's not routine activities. And executive function deficits are extremely frequent following childhood traumatic brain injury, and we know they have a significant impact on everyday functioning, schooling, and independence, including later in adulthood. And we know that assessment and also, of course, rehabilitation are very challenging because sometimes we don't have standardized tests. For example, in France, the norms of the tests we had were not sufficient, and sometimes they're not developmentally appropriate, and sometimes they lack also ecological validity. So the aims of this study were to perform a detailed description of executive functioning following moderate to severe childhood traumatic brain injury, and also to study demographic and severity factors influencing outcome. And we used the battery called Batterie FE, Childhood Executive Functions, developed by Arnaud Roy and his colleagues in Angers and Chambéry. And that's based on Diamond's developmental model of executive functions. I'll show you the battery afterwards. So we included 43 patients who had moderate to severe traumatic brain injury. They were aged 7 to 16 years, which is the age range of the battery. There were 2/3 of boys, like mostly in traumatic brain injury, and they were referred to a rehabilitation department for assessment or follow-up. And we excluded those who had a previous diagnosis of another condition that could influence executive functioning. So the mean age at injury was around 9 years, time since injury around 1 year, and we had, most of the kids had severe traumatic brain injury with a mean length of coma of 6 days. We also selected from the control database 86 children who were matched for age, gender, and parental education, and the estimated intellectual ability was significantly different between groups. So this is what it looks like. There are 4 domains that are assessed, so planning, inhibition, flexibility, and working memory. And each of the domains is assessed by 3 subtests, and some of them require verbal skills, others more spatial skills, so clinicians can tap in the test that's more relevant for a child they're assessing. And so the standardization is almost finished. They included 1,000 healthy kids, and several validation studies went on in parallel, including this one on traumatic brain injury. So I'll go through the results quickly, but overall, for example, for inhibition, all 3 subtests showed significant impairments in the traumatic brain injury group, and that was for almost all the outcome measures, which include time measures, so they're slower, also errors, and success. For flexibility, same thing, the 3 subtests were significantly impaired, again, also for timed measures and also for success and number of errors. For working memory, only one of the subtests was significantly different between groups, and that was the visual spatial updating task, whereas the verbal updating task and the dual task was not different across groups. For planning, we have not analyzed the scripts yet. There was no difference in the ray figure copy, where there is a program that's applied, and when the patient fails, then the program is given, and if he follows the program and has less difficulty, it's attributed to a lack of planning, for example. And so the only subtest that was impaired in the TBI group was the labyrinths, which you see an example of below. And the FE battery also includes, I forgot to say it in the first place, the brief questionnaire, so the behavior rating inventory of executive functions that has been normalized and standardized in the French population, 1,200 kids. And so we also applied that and gave it to the parents and to the teachers when they accepted to answer it. And this questionnaire found significant impairments in most of the subscales of the brief, in the parents as well as in the teacher ratings, with slightly higher impairments reported by teachers than by parents. The settings in a classroom and at home are different, and expectations also. Looking at factors influencing outcome, we did not find any correlation between any of the subtests or the brief questionnaire with socioeconomic status measured by parental education. Traumatic brain injury severity, taking into mind that they were almost all severe, so they all had a coma, or almost all of them, or age at injury. So in conclusion, this study found significant impairments in the traumatic brain injury in most of the domains assessed by this battery, and that included all the time measures and most of the error and success measures with moderate to large effect sizes. Impacts in everyday life at home and at school were also highlighted by the brief questionnaire, and it was slightly worse with teachers. And in this study, we did not find factors influencing outcome. And interestingly, if you want to check Jeanne Roche's poster, she did the study in brain tumor patients, and they have a slightly different profile with timed measures all impaired and error measures most of the time not different from the controls. Thank you.